Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. Today, I have a very special, exciting guest for you. Her name is Darcy Luoma, and she's the owner and CEO of Darcy Luoma Coaching and Consulting. She's the creator of Thoughtfully Fit, and she's the author of a book that came out last year called Thoughtfully Fit, Your Training Plan for Life and Business Success. She's a master certified coach. She's a facilitator. She's an inspirational and motivational speaker. And I'm super excited to have her on the podcast today to hear her story. Welcome so much, Darcy. I'm happy to have you here.
Thanks so much, Julie. It's a pleasure to be with you.
We're going to have a blast. I can just tell. I love your energy.
Thank you. I also love what you're putting out and that your passion in the world and your mission. It just so aligns with what my interests are. So it's really an honor to be here.
I'm just really glad that we somehow met up. It's crazy, right? This world, it's such a big world, but such a small world. So,
yes.
So I'm excited. So why don't you just start out by telling me your story? Whatever you want it, wherever you want to start.
Okay. I am a mom. First and foremost, I feel like that's what takes up the most of my energy and brings me the most joy. I have two daughters, Josie and Jaden. I spent about 2 decades in politics, working for government, for a U.S. senator, for some presidential campaigns, and when the senator that I was working for 12 years announced that he was not going to be seeking re-election, I hired a coach to help me navigate my next steps, because I just assumed I would stay in the political sector, and my family, my friends, colleagues all assumed that. And she asked me a question that just changed the trajectory of my life. She said, Darcy, it was fascinating. Yeah. She said, if you made a decision right now on what you're going to do next, and in 10 years, you looked back and had no regrets, what would you do? And Julie, that was just like powerful. It was not scary. It was not hard. I said, I'd start my own business. I would do keynote speaking and coaching and consulting. And so she helped me work through all that inner trash talk that provoked and deal with all of the uncertainties to be able to launch my business. So my last day in the Senate was January 2nd, 2013. And January 3rd, I officially launched Darcy Luoma Coaching and Consulting.
Seriously.
And I am not yet at a year or 10 years. I'm almost there. And I can say I have no regrets.
So the vision that you had in that moment is exactly what you have now.
It's interesting. I don't know that how clear the vision was of what it would look like 9 years later. I just knew that I wanted, so it's probably not what I had imagined it would have been. And it's exactly as amazing as I had hoped it would be. I didn't know, I had never been an entrepreneur or a small business owner. I had never, stepped into my passion and creativity in this way. So I didn't really know what to expect. And where I am now has been a journey of continuing to ask myself that question that my coach asked me. What brings me the most joy, and what decisions do I want to make where I will hopefully have no regrets?
Isn't that fascinating? That is such a powerful question too, that it just basically changed your life. Because did you have an idea before she asked you that question? I said she, I'm assuming, but
it was a she. I mean, Julie, no,
I never thought that you wanted to do this.
I had dreamt since I was in college that I would someday want to do this, but I never thought it was a dream. It was like a far-fetched dream.
Yeah.
All of the conversations that I was having with my colleagues, my friends, my family was just around, okay, should I go work for the next US senator? Should I go back on a presidential campaign? Should I go, right? It was on this path. It didn't even dawn on me or occur to me that I could completely charter a new path and create a different future.
Yeah. So what do you think it was that caused you to think that that would be cool? Like, I want to be a coach. What do you think it was in you? Like, what was the desire?
So from early on, I talked about in college, like that was my dream. I worked for a leadership consulting firm.
Okay.
And I got the bug, and we everything we did was around, he was certified, the owner, around the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey's work.
Good book.
And I loved helping people and watching and being in this room. That was back in the days, Julie, when my role was, do you remember the old, what's that machine called that, oh my gosh.
Oh, I know what, like the overhead machine.
Yes, the overhead projector.
The only reason I knew, because you made the motion.
Yes.
Where you have the little transparencies and you would write on them. Yeah, I remember those.
That was my job, was to put the next transparency up for him, right? But I was sitting there all day watching these people that were coming in, and they were sort of arms crossed and, not really engaged. By the end, they were, they had new awareness. They were exploring their communication style and their leadership style and being able to step into conflict in a different way. And I was like, I love this. So for the next 20 years, until I had the courage to start my own business, I was getting certified as a coach.
Okay.
I got my master's in organization development. I got certified in organization and relationship systems coaching. So I was I was just leaning into my passion.
While you were doing the other job.
Yep, exactly.
Great.
And so I knew I loved it. And I had a lot of people coming to me. I was doing a lot of coaching without even knowing it or realizing it. So when I was doing my master's degree in 2004 and found out there's such a thing as becoming a professional coach, I was like, wait, what do you mean? What is that?
Yeah.
I was hooked. Yeah. Because it gave me a title, an identity around what I already knew my passion was, because I would be sitting in these meetings for the senator, and there'd be a room full of people and lobbyists and constituents. And after 45 minutes, they'd be talking about some policy, the Iraq War or Fallen Dafa or something. And they'd say, so Darcy, what does the senator think about that? And Julie, I would be caught off guard, because in that time I was sitting there watching the dynamics. Like, I wonder why she's not speaking. And I wonder if we had done introductions first, if it would have created some more psychological safety and we would have more voices. And I wonder if we had designed some ground, right?
So you were trying to manage the group.
Yes. And try to figure out, how do we make the discussion better? How do we get all the voices heard? So they'd ask me and I'd be like, well, that's a great question. I'm not sure I could find out, because I was so tuned into the dynamics, the people. Everything we do is around creating high performing people and teams. And it specifically looks at the soft skills and the people problems, and how do you communicate and handle stress and deal with conflict.
Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit about that. I mean, I know you have the system that you created for your book, right? And it's something about the 6 hurdles, I think I read. I'm sorry, I haven't read the book, but I will. So do you want to tell me about that? Or do you want to tell me the kind of the precursors to that?
Well, so essentially what happened, I started my business and I started coaching, and I have coached hundreds and hundreds of people, thousands of hours. And I started to notice that every client that would come in had similar problems. I'd say, what would you like coaching on today? They all had similar problems that were getting in the way of them achieving their goals and being successful
in the business.
In their lives, right? Different players, different people, different details, but they all had the same problems. So I spent 5 years researching what the issues and the problems and the hurdles are that clients struggle with, that get in the way of them being successful.
Okay.
And we, after 5 years of research, and I'm doing this because we had all these flip charts all around with Post-its, and we were categorizing the problems. We research brought us to the place that there are 6 common hurdles that get in the way. no matter what you're trying to achieve, there are 6 main people problems. So we designed Thoughtfully Fit as the model to be able to train to overcome those hurdles. Because
Okay.
I've been a lifelong athlete, just like if you want to perform better physically, you can train and practice and you will be better prepared and the race will feel easier.
Right.
Same way, if you want to handle yourself more thoughtfully in all these
Need
situations.
to prepare.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. So tell me about that, maybe with the perspective of small businesses, because a lot of the people that I talk to work in small businesses, because veterinary hospitals are generally, anywhere from a few employees to maybe 50 to 100 employees. Like, tell me your take on that. Like, how do those groups function and how can they function better?
Yeah. So first of all, a shout out to all those vets out there in your audience. My daughters and I in COVID decided to be foster parents. And so we had 8 foster dogs and we are fostering kittens and
8 foster dogs.
Yes.
That's fascinating.
So we have been going to lots of vets over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And I tell you, small businesses, vets deal with some of the things that get in the way, being so overwhelmed, have so much to do, I can't even think, right? Being able to create some stillness and quiet the mind and set boundaries and be able to say no, that's hard for small business owners.
Yeah.
There's another one of the hurdles is getting stuck. And whether it is stuck with a relationship that's not working, stuck with some employees that you can't figure out, like they're technically good, but they're not good with people.
You probably should fire them, but they serve a purpose.
Yes. And if I fire them and it's the time of the Great Resignation, am I going to find somebody to replace them, or am I going to have to work twice as hard?
Yeah, maybe you'll get someone worse.
And maybe you'll get someone. Exactly. Another of the hurdles is, not always showing up the way I'd like. So you're stressed and you just got out of a surgery and it didn't go well. And the patient or what do you call the dog or the vet owner?
The pet is the patient and the owner is the client.
Thank you.
That's the verbiage we use. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
That's what we use. The client and the patient.
So if the surgery with the client does not go well and the patient is angry and upset, and then you need to go into the next appointment, how can you self-manage and choose to show up in a way that isn't bringing all that baggage and negativity into the next appointment?
Yeah.
Yeah. Those are hard.
Mentally very hard. It's a very hard switch to make sometimes. Yeah.
It's a hard switch to make.
Yeah.
And then also as a small business owner, being able to handle yourself well when you're blindsided and, you get somebody who calls and they're angry because that person that you haven't fired, that you think you should fire, pissed somebody off. And now you got that, right. That person calling you and they're like, I can't believe they, and then instead of pausing in the moment to think and to breathe and to respond thoughtfully, you overreact. And then you add fuel to the fire and you make it worse. And now you got to deal with the added challenge of not responding thoughtfully in the moment. And all of those obstacles, those hurdles, take you away from doing what you do best. Right.
So when you talk about the hurdles, are there specific strategies for each one? Or are the strategies kind of overlapping? Like you talked about boundaries, which is a big one for us because we have that, soft heart where obviously you had a bunch of foster dogs. So you probably should have stopped at 4 and you ended up with 8.
Exactly.
So the boundary line was probably pushed, but are there strategies that are different for each of these hurdles or are they similar?
Yes, there are strategies that are different for each one. So
I don't know how deep you want to get into this, but I find it fascinating. So,
Julie, we can go as deep as you want.
all right. Well, go ahead and explain it to me.
Yeah. So with the thoughtfully fit model, there's basically there are 6, and I'll just put up the
Oh, good.
the
You have a
visual.
little thing. Cool.
Yeah, I got a little thing.
I love it.
So 3 of the obstacles are internal, where we get in our own way. And then 3 of them are external, where we have challenges in relationships with other people.
Love
And
it.
so if we look first at just the 3 that are internal, and they're all based on the metaphor being physically fit, which I mentioned, you can train and practice, and taking the stairs up 5 flights is easier than if you have not trained and practiced. In the same way, you can train and practice to set boundaries, to handle yourself thoughtfully, to be able to respond well when you're blindsided, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
So the first hurdle, stillness, there's so much to do, I can't even think. Second
This
one
would be when you're facing overwhelm.
This is when you're overwhelmed.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
And you are oftentimes with people who have a lack of stillness, and they are not able to quiet the mind. They are not able to set boundaries. Oftentimes, there are not good systems and processes in place, right? And so they're not working efficiently. Oftentimes we find that people who have a lack of stillness are people pleasers, and they don't want to rock the boat. And so they just say, oh, you know what, that person that we should fire, they aren't doing a good job, but I'll just stay late and do the extra work for them. And it creates this overwhelm.
Gotcha. Okay.
That of course then leads to
Everything
resentment.
else. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then strength is being able to consciously choose how you show up. And that is a heavy lift, because, you know, not always handling yourself the way you'd like. You walk in and the client is there, and they got there 20 minutes late, and now they want you to, you know, hurry up, and we get triggered. And so strength is being able to choose how you show up in any situation.
Okay.
And then that third internal one we talked about is endurance. That is being able to overcome obstacles, to get unstuck. Now, for each of these, there are specific strategies, but there's also a core. And if you look at the very center of the model, no matter what obstacle you're having, where you're triggered, what your challenge is, it always comes back to these 3 simple steps: engaging your core. So just like if you're physically fit, you can't do 20 sit-ups once a month and have a strong core. You need to train and practice consistently. And if you do build a strong physical core, every movement's easier.
Right.
You're less likely to get injured. In the same way with thoughtfully fit, it's these 3 steps. You pause, think, and then act. And that is, while there's in the thoughtfully fit book, I go through strategies for all 6 of the specific hurdles.
Right.
The core, it doesn't matter what hurdle it is, you can always go back to pause, kick yourself off of autopilot, so that you can set yourself up for step 2, which is to think. That's where you ask yourself some thoughtful questions. That's where you create some new awareness. And this whole model, thoughtfully fit, is about being able to handle yourself thoughtfully in any of these circumstances where you are feeling like there's uncertainty or conflict or change. It's exactly what I'm doing with my clients, and it's what you do with your coaching clients. You help
it's all
them
about
create new awareness.
Yeah. Well, and just, you know, we always talk about kind of understanding yourself well enough to know what you're feeling. So it makes sense. If you pause, that would be a great place to understand what's going on, ask yourself some questions going into that thought process. And then until you get those 2 pieces figured out, then you can take the proper action. So it makes all kinds of sense for exactly what I talk about. So yeah, that's a great way to think about it, the way you've modeled it.
and hopefully then, because you took the time to pause and think and create that new awareness, then you can act more thoughtfully than if you skip those first two steps. Because I had somebody recently say to me, oh my gosh, Darcy, I realized I do it backwards. I act and then I think, oh, why did I do that? I have to pause.
Yeah.
And go back and clean up the mess from not handling themselves thoughtfully in the first place.
Right, right. So tell me how your background as a athlete, tell me a little bit about that, and tell me how that pushed you into figuring this all out. I mean, it's a little bit.
Well, it's interesting.
Uh-oh, you froze up a little bit on me.
Oh.
Okay, are you back?
Am I gone? Yeah, can you hear me?
Now you're back. Okay,
you're
back. You're kind of like you're kind of pausing and then speeding up and then stopping. I don't know what's going on.
Okay, I'm just gonna turn off the Wi-Fi. So make sure I'm on the hardline Ethernet. Okay, am I back? Is this okay now?
Yeah, it's saying my internet's unstable now.
Okay, I'm not seeing any indications on my end.
Okay, but you're good. You're good now. You're good now. Go on. So tell me about your background as an athlete.
Yeah. So in 1998, my best friend called me and she said, Darcy, I think we should do a triathlon on Sunday. I was like, kidding me? This Sunday? No, I'm not going to do a triathlon. She's like, we do marathons all the time and 10Ks and, and we, you own a bike. We love to go mountain biking and you know how to swim. We do master swim. Why wouldn't we do all three together? So I naively said yes and show up 5 days later at 5:30 a.m. My first red flag, Julie, should have been the name of the race was the Devil's Challenge. And so
that should have keyed you in right there, huh?
It should have keyed me in. And I'm looking around trying to figure out, like, where do you change out of your swimsuit after you get done with the, in the lake? And I come to find out that, like, you don't. It's all out in the field. There's no changing rooms. You actually, do all three in the same outfit.
Yeah.
And, so then I go down to the starting line and the gun goes off and like 50 women in my wave, we all go running in and I'm getting kicked and hit and the water's churning and I couldn't figure out where the buoys were to see where to go. The bike was hilly. I was miserable. I had to walk the hills on the bike. The run, I mean, the only reason I didn't take the SAG vehicle back to the start, the only reason I finished is because there was a lot of people out there cheering and my pride, my ego. I was like, I'm going to finish. Right? I did not want to let them down. So when I was done, I thought, well, it was miserable. It was hard. It was so hard. But there was something about the energy in the air and about having all these people who chose to sign up to do this event, to be healthy, regardless of what your age or size or fitness level was.
Yeah.
And so I decided and committed. I'm like, I want to do this again. And I want it to be less hard. I want it to be more fun. So I hired a triathlon coach. I joined a master swim team. I went and joined a club in the summer to do open water swimming. I bought a new wetsuit and a triathlon bike, and I started to train and practice. And I did the same race this fall, the Devil's Challenge, 23 years later. I actually was faster than I was when I was 28.
That's great.
And it was fun.
Yeah.
The same principles apply when you are looking at how you show up in your life and in your relationships and the problems and the struggles and the hurdles that get in the way, that you can train and practice to be able to make your life easier, just like you can train and practice to make that race, that event easier.
Yeah.
That's where I had this aha.
Yeah,
when my clients would come in and say, oh, Darcy, I've got this relationship that isn't working. That's one of the core 6 hurdles. Relationships aren't working. that you can train and practice to not overfunction in the relationship. You can train and practice to have the courage to state your truth and what you want and need, instead of always acquiescing and saying, oh, it's not a big deal, I'll just do it. And I think probably for a lot of your viewers and a lot of your clients who own small businesses and are vets, they're overwhelmed because there's so much to do. There isn't time to train and practice. And that's the hard thing. And that's where you realize it's a little bit of like, if you can pause and think before you act, yeah, it takes a little bit of extra time, but the results are going to be better. So you can get back to doing what you do best instead of having to clean up the mess in the first place.
Right. So that is something really interesting for me to think about, because when I'm working with my clients, I always talk about this is work, like working on yourself is work, right? And that's kind of what you're saying, is if you're getting ready for a triathlon, there's work involved. And it's not something that you can just snap your fingers and fix. It's something that you have to every day show up for, right? You have to train, you have to, whatever you have to do for whatever event you're training for. It's very similar with your life. So if you're having a challenge in your veterinary hospital, you're having a challenge with, whatever, mentally or physically, there's work involved in fixing it. It's not just quitting. Like I hear vets all the time say, well, maybe if I just got another job. And it's like, no, that's not it. That's not it. You went into this for a reason. You loved it for a reason. So let's do the work to get you back to the place where you love it. So is that kind of what you're saying?
It is. And the good news is the more you train, the easier it gets. If you only do 20 sit-ups once a month, it's going to be hard and you're going to get sore and it's going to be painful.
Every time, right?
If you're consistent,
every time I stop exercising and then start back up again, it's like, oh, damn, why did I stop?
That's right. And yet, if you're consistent and you keep training, it gets easier. All of a sudden, right? If you jog a minute and then walk 2 and jog a minute and walk 2, and the next day you jog 90 seconds and the next day you jog 2 minutes, it's going to get easier. All of a sudden, you're going to be able to jog a full 5K without walking, and you're not going to be sore and miserable.
Right.
It's the same way working on yourself.
Yeah.
And to your point, whether or not they should leave and quit and shut down the veterinary business and move on, who knows? But I'll tell you what your point is, Julia, well taken, that if you don't address the core issues that are making you feel miserable, they're going to follow you. The universe will keep providing the same lessons for you to learn until you learn it.
Yep. I see that all the time. People think if they just go to another practice, if they just had a different boss, if they just have a different spouse or whatever it is, or your kids, you could change your kids.
Right. And that's another one of the hurdles, is if I'd be fine if only someone else were different. Right. That's right. Like, okay, if my kids would change, if only the receptionist would be different, if only this client,
if only the clients were nicer.
Mm-hmm. But the reality is we can't change other people. And so the energy we expend being angry or frustrated that they aren't the way we think they should be, or worse, trying to get them to change to be the way we think they should be, is energy and attention that is distracted from focusing on what you actually can do something about, what you do control, which is how you respond to those frustrating people that are making you go crazy.
Yeah. Well, and I think just that sentence, making me crazy, it's not really them, it's you, what you're thinking about them, I always say. So what would your advice be? Let's just say, we have vets out there that are like, the clients are driving us crazy, because that's a common complaint. They're demanding, they want everything for nothing. They want it right now. They don't want to wait. Like all of those problems that we face with clients that drive us crazy. Like, what would be your most, I guess, your first piece of advice to start down that road of getting to a different place in thinking about that?
Yeah. So if we simplify it and have it just look at it through the lens of the core,
Yeah.
first thing to do is to pause. And it sounds like a lot of your clients are pausing. They've hired you and they're working with you, and that is creating a natural pause, right? So then to be able to think and to reflect on, okay, what are the themes and the patterns? Because if it's a one-off outlier problem, deal with that. But when you can think about what are the things that are happening, recurring over and over again, what are those struggles, those complaints, those frustrations, and then be able, that step 3, to be able to act to address what those patterns are. So for instance, if you notice that there's something frustrating about the timing and when people show up and that they aren't ready when you, the vet, are ready, they're not, and it's inefficient, looking at what are the systems and processes that we have in place. Maybe we need to call and send a reminder and say, hey, when you get here, want to make sure you get here 10 minutes early to fill out the paper, whatever it might be.
Whatever the bottleneck is.
What's creating that bottleneck. So, or maybe you realize that part of the problem and the theme, the pattern that you notice is that you have employees who aren't doing what they're told, and what everything has in common is you, and you realize like you are not giving that feedback to tell them to what's not working because you don't like conflict. And so instead, you're just putting up with it. And now it's creating this ripple effect of bigger problems than just you not giving that feedback in a way that it can be received. So that's where I always think, look at what are the patterns? What are the themes? What is it that keeps showing up over and over again, and try to get to the core to address that at the core root level.
Yeah. So that kind of brings me to a question about conflict, because a lot of us as veterinarians, I always say I love conflict, and I kind of do, mostly from the reason I love it is I like the problem solving part of it, and I like to kind of like work it out and then try to get to some sort of resolution. So when I say I like conflict, it's not that I kind of do like the fighting, but but I like more of the trying to figure it out and then, come up with a solution. So if somebody's very conflict averse, and they're very, I don't know what the right word is, but it's very hard for them to face those kind of situations internally, because it sounds like that's part of what you work on. What advice would you give those people to try to work towards making that, like what muscle can you exercise to get that to be easier facing those conflicts?
Yep. So a couple of things I'll say, and this falls under the practice of balance in the Thoughtfully Fit model. How do you balance what you want and need with what I want and need? And when our relationships are out of balance, it's what creates conflict. In particular, if you fall on the end of the spectrum of avoiding or being uncomfortable with conflict, you, Julie, are on this end of the spectrum. Like you're okay with it. You lean into it. It wasn't
always that way though. Like I learned it. I was very timid in high school, but somehow along the way, it was something I developed. So I wasn't always this way.
That's awesome. And you are a role model and a source of inspiration for people who don't like conflict, because you can develop it.
Yeah.
So, and one of the things, that there's the mindset shift, and then there's the skills. Right. So the mindset shift could be, for some people who avoid conflict, is that conflict is bad. It's negative. The shift is conflict is an indication of something trying to happen. And so if you can shift into curiosity, like, what's not working? What's trying to happen that is creating this conflict? That then can get you more in the mindset of leaning into the conflict like you do, Julie, than being fearful and shying away from it. Right. Then to have the skills. One of the things that we teach in the book, when you talk about other strategies, the book is filled with strategies. There's the 3 C's. So courage, compassion, and curiosity. So first of all, you need to have the courage to state what you want and need, right? If you are looking at in that relationship that's out of balance, that has conflict, so Julie, I've got to tell you, this is what's hard for me, and this is what I need in the relationship. This is what I'd like to redesign. You have to state your needs with courage in a way that it can be heard and received. So that's where the compassion comes in, right? If I come in and say, Julie, this isn't working for me, 96% of the time, how you start a conversation is how it ends. So if I come in with a harsh startup, it's going to end harshly.
Right.
So that's the compassion piece. And then the curiosity is, how do you see it? What's hard about this for you? What do you want and need? So that if you are feeling like, oh, conflict is hard, if you can lean into the 3 C's. A lot of times for people, conflict is hard. They are not good at the courage. They're good at compassion and curiosity, but the courage is hard. For other people who are on the end of the spectrum, that where maybe their conflict is not only easy, they kind of are maybe not where you've developed it, but they have either they grew up and they have a much more direct approach and kind of can come across harshly and like a bully. Chances are they've got strong courage. They need to turn the volume maybe up on the compassion and maybe also on the curiosity. And
turn the courage down a little.
Well, that's what's interesting is when you look at the 3 C's, I want you to think about it like a DJ mixing board. So instead of a volume or a dimmer switch where you're turning it up and turning it down, you can actually keep your courage high and turn up the volume on compassion. So you don't, because sometimes people will say, well, if I don't be that direct, then I'm not going to get what I need. It's like, you can be that direct. You can get what you need if you turn up the volume on compassion so that you're delivering that message in a way it can be heard. You don't need to water down what you need or what you want. You don't need to water down your courage. You need to turn up the volume on the compassion, and then likely also on the curiosity, which is, so I just gave you some really tough feedback and delivered a really courageous, direct message. How do you see it? How are you feeling right now? What do you think is the best way forward? What are you frustrated with? So then it becomes a dialogue instead of a monologue.
Right. And I would add to that curiosity piece is knowing if you're in a leadership position, knowing your team, so you know who needs which approach. Like if you get really good at reading people, you can tell the people that need a more direct approach in conflict and the people that need a softer approach. And if you can, and to me, that's what you're talking about. Curiosity is figuring out what that person needs, even if it's just intuitively. So if you come on too strong and you feel them, pulling back, that you can pull yourself down a notch.
Yes, and especially in veterinary offices that are small and oftentimes probably have a small, intimate team, you can't hide and disappear like you can in a big, huge meta, company. Right. So instead of trying to just figure it out, you can design your alliance with those employees. You can ask them, how do you like to receive feedback? Do you want it direct, or do you like a little sugar on top? How do you best feel appreciated? Right? Asking them. And if they're like, I don't know, I've never thought about it. You can get curious and say, well, is it, would you like a little gift card to go get coffee? Is it, quality time? Do you want to have lunch together? Is it, you want me to put something in the newsletter to all of our clients saying how great you are? Like, what is it? And you can design an alliance with each of those employees so that, and that's going to increase the chances that they will stay, because you will be communicating in a way that works for them instead of having one style across the board.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. That is absolutely true. So are those the kind of things that you work with because you coach executives too? Yeah. And so is that the kind of stuff that you coach them on? Or is there something unique about people that are in a more executive position? Because we have layers in our veterinary hospitals. We have like our animal assistants and our technicians and our associate veterinarians, and then our owners. And then there's corporate practices where there's layers and layers of corporate people. And I think sometimes small businesses that get taken over by corporations, they struggle with that transition from, the tiers. So is it different?
The one thing that I see is really different once you get up. The higher you get up in leadership and executive, the less vulnerable you can be, and the fewer places you have to get support. So you start and you're an intern, or it's your first job, you can be like, Julie, I don't know how to answer this question, or how do I do this? You ask a ton of questions because you're learning and people expect that.
Right.
Once you get up to those higher levels, there is an expectation that you're the leader and that you know things. And so the ability to be vulnerable and to have a support system is a lot harder. And also oftentimes the challenges are higher stakes.
Yeah. Well, that for sure happens to new veterinarians. They go from being a student and having all the hand holding, and then one day you graduate and now you're in a hospital setting and you're the boss now. Like you're telling everybody what to do, and you're telling the clients what to do, and you're making the recommendations. That's a really intimidating place for people to be. Like, what advice would you give those people? Similar to the courage and.
Yeah. And so, the person who is transitioning in a role like that, or maybe you are a veterinarian that has been working for a company and the owners retire and you buy the business, and now you're the boss, and anytime you're going through and navigating a change like that, one of the strategies, there's so many different directions we could take this conversation right now.
I know we're going to be here for 8 hours, but I love it.
Right, exactly. One of the things you can do
multiples.
Exactly. And I'd be happy to. I love this conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
You can create a playbook, right? And so letting people know, like, here's what I know about my style. Here's how I communicate. Here's how I like to receive feedback. Here's what some of my quirks are. Here's what some of my weaknesses are. If you can design that up front and let people know. So for instance, when I was working for the senator, I did not do this early on. I learned these skills. I was going through my leadership training and my coach training. And so I sat down, this was a couple of years in, and said, hey, I want to design our alliance on our atmosphere and our culture here, and what helps each of us to flourish and to thrive. And one of the things that I shared is that I have a bad memory. And so I have put into place a lot of systems to help me, knowing I have a bad memory. So for instance, I will oftentimes after a meeting, I'll take notes and I'll do a quick recap. And then sometimes I'll send an email summary to make sure that we're on the same page. And that later when I think, God, what did we say we were going to do? I can go back and search and see it.
Yeah.
And so in that moment, my team, Julie, when it was a small office, I mean, there were only 5 employees, I could see they're looking around and I'm like, what's happening? They're like, we thought you just didn't trust us. We thought, like, why is Darcy sending an email when she could just walk 3 doors down and say, hey, do you got a minute? I'm like, oh my God, like that was a blind spot for me. I had no idea that was the impact, right? Because I had never designed that. So if you are a new veterinarian and you go from being in that place where you're asking lots of questions, one of the things you can design is say, hey, I'm really excited. I've been going to school. I've spent thousands of hours learning and getting these degrees, and I'm new. So I'm going to lean into curiosity, and I might have a little bit of a moment where I say, gosh, I'm going to talk through this because I'm not sure exactly which direction to go on this surgery. I want you at that point to ask me some questions and to mirror back what I'm saying, so that, because, right, you can design that with
Well,
your
that's
team.
okay. I think a lot of times veterinarians think, well, everyone thinks that when they're in a position that they should know, they put me in this position, I should know everything. It was like when I was the president of the Michigan VMA, they put me in this executive committee. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And, it makes you feel that imposter syndrome, right? That you're like, oh, I shouldn't be doing this. So I think just knowing that everybody starts there and that it's all okay.
Yes.
I tell my young vets, it's like, look, you're not supposed to know everything. You're supposed to go into that practice and ask for help. And the techs know a lot of things that you probably don't know. Trust them, trust the other doctors, call, phone a friend, whatever you have to do. There's so many resources, and it doesn't mean that you're not a good vet. I think that's the story we get in our heads, that if we don't know everything, we're not good. It's like me interviewing you. In my head, I'm like, well, I'm not very good at interviewing because I don't know how to do it. But it's kind of like, no, you just do it until you get better at it, right? So I think that is such a big story that we have that we need to change.
It is. And, the alternative doesn't look good, because if you go in with this, bravado and false and like, well, this is what we're going to do, because you don't want to look vulnerable, you don't want to look weak, that creates more problems.
Yeah. And people, well, they make more mistakes, number one. And also people see it eventually. They know that you don't know everything. So I always tell people, if you can confidently say, I don't know,
yeah,
I'm going to find out, or I don't know, but I know who to ask, that's a really big skill.
it is a big skill. And we're talking about veterinarians who have a small team. And the number one dysfunction of teams is a lack of trust. The antidote and how you build trust, or one of the antidotes, one of the ways to build trust, is in vulnerability. And so to look at it, to reframe it, instead of like, well, they need to trust me and I have to show them I have all the answers and I know, instead it can build trust to say, you know what, that's a really good question. I don't really know how to answer that. I'd like to think about it, or I'd like to talk with you and see if we can find the best answer on how to handle that client question, because I'm not sure either. That can create more respect and more trust than you saying, well, you need to tell them and go, and you're just making it up because you're nervous.
Right.
And it's not good advice. And then that person feels exposed and
Yeah, for sure. Because that is something that I hear a lot of, is that they call it imposter syndrome, but I think it's just the thought that I should be different, or I should know more than I know.
Yeah.
And that's something that you see. Yeah. So what else? What other big things do we need to offer? I mean, all the stuff about what you're teaching, but.
Yeah. I mean, the only other thing I guess I'll say, talking about conflict, is when we work, an organization reaches out and because there's conflict, generally speaking, it's at one of two times. It's either at the beginning where it's like, oh gosh, there's some conflict and there's some dysfunctions on our team, and we really want to tackle this and figure out how to build trust, how to design an alliance, how to have a strong foundation. Or they don't do it then, and they wait, and they come to us a couple of years later when they haven't addressed it. They've avoided the conflict because it's too hard, it's too icky, it's too uncomfortable, and then we're just going to hope it gets better.
Right.
Then they come to us 5 years later, where now it's not just dysfunctional, now it's full-blown toxins.
Yeah.
And then it's even harder to deal with. So I would say to those clients of yours who are watching, if you are noticing that there is conflict, it is in your best interest to get curious, to name it, to address it, because if you don't, trust me, we see what happens over the long term. And when it's not addressed, there's 4 toxins that show up. Blaming. So blaming and criticism, that's the first.
Okay.
That toxin then creates the second, which is defensiveness. Once you have blaming and criticism and defensiveness, and it's like, well, why didn't you get this report done? And why didn't you call him? Well, I didn't call him because I didn't get the, sign off from you, right? Once you have that, the next toxin is contempt. Contempt is poisonous because it goes from being upset about the behavior to an attack on the person, right? You're an idiot.
Personal. Yeah.
It's personal. And then that means not far behind is the 4th toxin, which is stonewalling. And stonewalling is when you are emotionally flooded and you shut down. So this is a cautionary tale to those who are watching and listening, to say, if you're sensing that there is conflict and it's uncomfortable, lean into it, get curious, get some coaching, do a team retreat, so that it doesn't get to the place where it is full-blown toxic.
Yeah. I think we hear a lot about that in practices where things just kind of get out from under the leader. So what about the people that don't have that leadership power? Let's say you have an owner that's letting all this stuff happen, and then you're working for this owner. Is there a way to address that? I mean, I kind of think there is, but I want to hear what you say.
Yeah.
Like if you're in a toxic practice or a toxic situation with a leader that may be causing some of this, I guess, like what would you do as the subordinate?
So one thing I would not do is address it in the moment when emotions are high and tense, and it's tense, right? So I would wait till it's a moment where things are calmed down.
So
and
pause.
Oftentimes pause. What happens when when you're not in the height of it, then it's like, oh, thank God. Okay. Everything's fine. I don't want to poke the bear. I'm not going to say anything.
Right.
No, that is the time to address it, to have that conversation when things are calm, not when you're in the storm.
Right.
So when you're in the conflict, in the storm, in the toxins, all that blood that is in your brain normally to be able to be thoughtful and curious goes to your extremities, that fight or flight, right?
Yeah.
Lose the ability to be creative.
Yeah.
So, and then I'd say, that's the time to, depending on the situation, and I'm giving a general answer because of time, but that's the time to lean in and to reach out to that owner and say, hey, I'm wondering if we can have a conversation. I've just noticed some things, and I wanted to get your opinion, and I wanted to share it. And that's where you can lean into the 3 C's, right? The courage. I wanted to share some things that I'm feeling frustrated about, but I'd like to hear your thoughts. And so you're delivering that courageous message with compassion. It isn't like, hey, this is ridiculous. There's toxins.
Your practice is toxic.
Yeah.
You don't say that.
No, don't say that. Right. So that soft startup, that compassion, the courage to say what you want to say, and then the curiosity, how do you see it? What do you think the issues are? Now, if you have a leader that is interested in creating a culture that is positive and you use that approach, you're going to open the door for dialogue and for there to be some shifts.
Right.
That is assuming that they have an interest in creating a healthy, positive culture.
Right.
That may not be the case.
And sometimes it's not. Sometimes, a leader of a practice just isn't open to that, which, then that's a whole different coaching session, right?
It is. That's a different session. And that might be where you need to create some boundaries,
right?
And have some tough conversations.
Yeah. I love it. All right. Well, we're I don't know how long we've been going, but it seems like a long time. So I don't want to keep you too long, but I love all the stuff you're telling me, and I would love to hear more. So I hope you'll come back one day to do this again.
I would be honored to come
Yeah,
back.
I
and
am
do this
loving this.
again.
And then I'll actually read the book before we talk again. And then I'll have a whole new list of questions, I'm sure.
That sounds fantastic. And
Yeah.
so for people who are watching that are curious and want to dig in, I mean, you can
Yes.
always Thoughtfully Fit, you can always buy the book.
Tell me
but
where they can find you.
the other thing that they can do, if you're curious, like what are these 6 hurdles and what gets in the way? If you go to thoughtfullyfit.com, there's a free quiz.
Oh,
And if you
nice.
take the quiz, it's about 2 minutes. Take the quiz. It'll tell you which of those 6 hurdles are your biggest, and it'll give you strategies to start to train to overcome and to clear that hurdle. So you talked
Awesome.
about what are these strategies? We talked
Right.
about a couple of them today.
Yes. Yeah, we need to go
It'll
into it
tell
more,
you.
but we will.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So that's the website. And that's the quiz.
Yeah, thoughtfullyfit.com. And then if somebody wants to learn more about my practice or watch some of our Thoughtfully Fit Thursday videos or read the blog, darcyluoma.com is the website that has all sorts of free resources and blog, and also talks about the speaking, training, and consulting that we do.
Awesome. Is there anything else that we didn't say that you want to say?
I just think it's awesome that you are investing in this way in your community and
It's
helping
fun.
other veterinarians be successful. I think it's fantastic.
Well, I am honored and privileged that you came on the podcast, and I hope that we can get together again. We can outline
I look forward to it.
another little session, and we'll go through this in more detail, because all of this stuff is exactly what veterinarians need to help them right now. It's
That's
amazing,
awesome.
amazing stuff. Yeah, I appreciate you so much.
Thank you.
All right, thanks for coming on the podcast, Darcy, and thank you everyone for listening. And go out there and have a beautiful week. Thanks. Bye. Bye, Darcy.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.